Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today for the 2025 Selective Test Preparation Masterclass hosted by NL English Academy, Cortex Thinking Skills Academy, and Precision Mathematics Academy. First of all, we hope you and your families are all having a lovely start to the new year, spending quality family time together and enjoying the break. Before we do jump into things, we would first like to introduce ourselves.
Hi, my name is Rachel Kerr, founder of Precision Mathematics Academy, specializing in OC, selective, and high school mathematics. And today I will be covering the mathematical reasoning component of this seminar.
Hi, my name is Alvin. I am the founder and principal of Cortex Academy, which is a thinking skills specialist tuition, which teaches specifically for the selective test. And I'll be covering the thinking skills section of this masterclass.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel and Alvin. My name is Nelson Luo, and I am the founder and principal of NL English Academy. We specialize in OC, selective, and high school English tutoring. I'll be covering the reading and writing components of the selective test for today. The purpose of today's masterclass is to provide you all with some key exam information, as well as specialized strategies and techniques that your child can use to prepare for the upcoming selective test this May. We'll be covering an exam summary of 2025 updates, strategies for all 4 exams in the selective test, as well as a Q&A session for you all to ask any questions for us to answer at the very end. So if you do have any questions throughout today's masterclass, please click the Q&A button and type in your question. It should be just along the bottom bar. And if that's not there, or if you're having any issues, you can just simply type your question in the chat as well. Awesome. As you may already know, there are 4 exam sessions within the selective test. The first exam is reading, followed by mathematical reasoning, then thinking skills, before ending the day with a writing exam. Firstly, the most prominent change that you may already be aware of is the shift to computer-based exams. So students will be allocated to a test center on a given day, with computers provided for them. The writing is typed and working out paper will also be provided where needed. Students are to bring 2B pencils, erasers, a sharpener, and their test admission ticket, but are not allowed to bring dictionaries, or calculators at all. Secondly, the test is no longer held on one day only. It would be spread across 3 days over a single weekend for the purpose of making it more convenient for the students and, obviously the parents with their busy schedules. Students will be allocated to 1 exam day and will be doing all 4 exams on the one day. Thirdly, there has been a change in the exam weighting structure. So most notably, the reading section has increased from 15 to 25% weighting, and thinking skills has decreased from 35% to 25% weighting. Students should allocate their study time accordingly to adequately prepare for all exams as a whole. Now, I will dive into breaking down the reading and writing exams separately with different exam techniques that I suggest students should use to approach these sections. Before I start, I want to emphasize again that English now makes up half of your child's selective test mark. The following exam techniques and strategies that I will be covering are what we teach and build into NL English Academy students. So for any NL English Academy students that are listening right now, this will be some good revision for you all. Awesome. Next slide. The writing section is worth 25% of your total selective test score and consists of 1 open response to be completed within 30 minutes. This style of writing can be anything. So it can include creative writing, narratives, persuasives, discussions, informatives, report writing, letters, and so on. I do recommend students to learn the structures, microstructure, and stylistic techniques for approaching a wide range of different writing styles. When preparing for writing at home, the single most effective way to learn, in my opinion, is based on applying feedback to creating a revolving cycle of improvement. The best way to improve in writing is by building and changing your habits that naturally come out on exam day when you are under pressure. Obviously, because once you are under pressure, under time conditions, that's when your subconscious mind brings out all these habits. And that's what I've noticed within students doing mock exams and practice papers and so on. You don't change your writing by writing a lot. You change your writing habits by actively applying the feedback that you receive and progressing on with that cycle. Many parents think that repeating writing tasks over and over again is the best way to go, but personally, I do disagree. It is significantly more beneficial for students to spend more time reflecting and evaluating on the feedback that they receive, and sort of using that in a way as a compass to improve for the next writing task that your child does. With exam technique, students must firstly read the prompt carefully to ensure a clear understanding of the task. You will receive a high mark if you produce an original and engaging response to the writing task. You will receive a lower mark if your writing does not address the topic outlined in the writing task. It is so easy to forget, but I've seen so many students go off track in the middle of their writing piece and sort of steer away from the question that the exam paper is actually asking them to do. So therefore, I do think it's extremely important, but easy to forget, to identify one, the key elements, two, the purpose, audience, and requirements of the question, and do stick to that throughout your piece. Next, generate ideas and jot down any relevant thoughts or concepts that come into your mind. I would consider making a quick brainstorm or a small list in the form of a plan in maximum 3 minutes. An analogy that I once read, it comes from a quote. It goes something like this: "No wind favors a sailor without a destination." So if we sort of apply that idea, planning will save you time. Stopping thinking multiple times in the middle of your piece, which will ultimately, take away time. Keep an eye out, estimate where you should be up to in your writing at specific times. For example, in a creative, if you are halfway through your time with 15 minutes left, you should be almost at your climax, or almost wrapping up where your writing tension is in that creative macro structure. Do take a moment to review your plan and review your grammar, punctuation, and spelling at the end. Check for logical transitions between your paragraphs and those specific sections that you are writing in. Students, you may feel, and oftentimes I'm guilty of this myself, when I was younger as well. So you may feel relieved after writing. And many students do oftentimes find themselves reading over their work quite passively. So when they're checking over their work, they're sort of just reading it through with the feeling that they've already completed the exam. But you must put even more effort when you check over your work. Looking at each individual sentence, for grammar, punctuation, spelling, and cohesion, to ensure that you don't lose marks on these small errors, because they do stack up. For the students that are listening in here today, you can think of this an analogy, sort of like a piñata. So think of it like a piñata at your friend's birthday party. No one wants to leave a single candy lying on the ground, right? So you can sort of think about it like that. You want to pick up all these crumbs. On a side note, since this is the first year that this exam is computer-based, it is extremely important for students to practice touch typing to optimize your speed and accuracy typing. So under these timed conditions, it will be a huge advantage, in my opinion, if you have strong typing skills. And at the same time, I do think it's quite a risk that you'll be taking if your typing skills are quite poor and you need to keep rewriting your words slowly as the clock ticks away. Awesome. So moving on to the reading section. This section makes up for another 25% of your total selective test mark. This exam has 4 question styles that I'll go through today, including comprehension of extracts, poems, closed passages, and choose the extract style questions. There are 30 marks total in this session, which is the same as all previous years. Students, you must have a different exam technique when approaching different reading question styles. That's very important. Your time management strategies must also change depending on the exam section. So both your technique and time management should change. Your strategy should change for every one of these four sections. As the bulk of the time is usually taken from reading and understanding a text as opposed to answering the question itself. So in my opinion, there is no perfect time per mark because depending on the question, you should be spending more or less time for those sections. But in general, in some questions, you should be analyzing the text deeper and dedicating more time in reading, but for others, you should focus on skimming and understanding variance in ideas. So I'll cover this in more detail over the next few slides. Awesome. So in the first section of the reading exam, you will be presented with two extracts. This section requires you to find sort of like an optimal balance between skimming the extracts and looking for keywords and understanding the stylistic features of the extracts in depth for both of these extracts. A sort of key frame of mind when approaching this section is to always think about the overlapping themes between each of the extracts, since you will be provided with questions that ask about both extract A and extract B. Think about why these two extracts have been purposefully placed beside each other and comparatively analyze their similarities and sort of differences in your head. With these two extracts, always ask yourself this question: what is the main message that the author is trying to convey to the reader? When approaching this section with exam technique, first read the stems, the first part of the question, before you look at any of the possible answers, and keep the keywords of the question sort of consciously in the front of your mind. Then sort of as you scan the stimuli in approximately 2.5 minutes per extract, which is sort of like a rough guide, ensure you are actively reading and looking for key phrases, symbols, tones, emotions that convey the bulk of the insight within each extract. For each question, decide in your head what the answer is first, then look for the option that matches this closest. Awesome. The next section, poem MCQ. So this sort of tests students on how strong their textual analysis abilities are, which is how deeply they can infer meaning. Infer meaning, dissect metaphors and uncover a symbolism within a text. I do want students to sort of, one thing I do want you to keep in mind is that just remember poems are rarely ever literal in meaning. So please do keep this in mind. When you are analyzing the poem, it is quite common for students to think that this section should take less time because it's shorter, but that's completely incorrect. I believe this assumption is incorrect, as poems will always be significantly harder to break down and sort of dig through these layers of meaning to uncover the message that the author is actually trying to convey. Generally, poems tend to link to ideas that surround society or the human experience. And that sort of includes human emotions, journeys, or ideas that sort of resonate with people, me and you, all of us as a whole. That's what makes it so significant and sort of deep in a way to make it a poem in the first place. So I'll give you guys a few examples. So these sort of ideas can include love, family, the idea of growing up, the coming of age. These all ideas surround the human experience. Although the length of this, the poem text is shorter than the other sections, you should spend slightly more time reading the text carefully to try and decipher it. And I believe that will ultimately give you more clarity when you answer the questions. Also, moving on to closed passages. So this section makes up the next part of the selective reading exam. So in this section, students are presented with an informative text from which you see those 6 sentences have been removed inside the text. And these sentences are placed alongside the text with one extra sort of dummy sentence. Your task is to see which sentence best fits in each gap. Your approach to this section is almost the opposite, in my opinion, on to how you should be approaching the previous poem section. So how I explained the poem section and your approach for that. For closed passages, it should be the complete opposite. As the text is informative, your aim should be to understand the structure and flow of the text. And the flow of the text is how each body paragraph transitions from one onto another. Because generally, informatives do have an introduction followed by body paragraphs and a conclusion. And each of these body paragraphs, they are separated by a different idea. So each body paragraph will present a different idea centralized on a main point, which is different from all the other body paragraphs. So do keep that in mind. With exam technique, I highly recommend that you first start with either the introduction or conclusion if there is an empty gap there. Because generally those gaps are easier to start with, since the nature of those paragraphs are more summative and less into the details. So the body paragraphs are usually way more into the details. It can be quite confusing between one or the other in those body paragraphs. Do not start from top down. So do not start with the first gap and just go sequentially from the top gap down. Always pick the gap which will be the easiest to complete first. And in that way, you can think of it like a filter. You're trying to narrow down. Called a narrow down strategy. You're trying to narrow down your answer options so that as you approach the harder gaps, you have less in your pool of responses to choose from. So it ultimately provides a little bit more clarity. This narrow down strategy is optimal for this section, as there is risk of doing the more difficult gaps first and potentially getting incorrect, because what can happen is, since you cannot use the same answer response twice, getting an incorrect gap early at the start of when you're approaching this section can potentially lose you 2 marks because it takes away from an answer response in another gap. So after skimming the text and understanding the main points of each paragraph, read around each empty space. So you should be able to infer what type of sentence or idea should be in a certain gap by thinking about what idea links the sentence before it and the sentence after it. So naturally, the sentence in the gap is like connective tissue that connects these two together. By combining both of these strategies, I do believe your approach to closed passage questions should be clearer, direct, and a lot more purposeful. Awesome. So the last section of the reading exam, choose the extract style questions. This makes up actually a third of the exam marks. As you can see, 10 out of the 30 marks. So this section relies heavily on your reading retention skills and your ability to remember key ideas that are separated in the 4 provided extracts. These extracts may be formal, informal, in style, but they can include blogs, articles, reviews, reports, personal accounts, narratives. I do recommend students, or I do think students must read the extracts both quickly and accurately to retain the information in the shortest amount of time possible. I do think the main purpose of this is it's again right opposite to the poem section. The poem section, you're going deep into the textual analysis. This, you're trying to pick out those keywords and trying to retain it as effectively as you can. So I like to call this the time to information retention ratio. Every student should try and practice this question style under quicker and quicker time conditions. So in a way, when you're at home and you're attempting these questions, set a shorter and shorter timer. So in that way, you can find the sort of exact reading speed that allows you to remember the key ideas that are in each text, to the point that you're not unable to actually absorb the information. So once you hit that optimal peak of the curve, that's where you should practice with when you do practice at home under timed conditions. So questions may focus on implied meaning, attitude, opinion, purpose, style, and register. Students should approach this section again with a different exam technique. So quickly scan through all the extracts first. Keep in mind the keywords in each text, and then keep the main idea and the flow of the various texts in mind, differentiating the ideas between each text. So that's quite important because each text will usually follow a similar theme, but vary in their idea. So for example, I'll give you an example. So the theme may be, say, about water. So one extract might be about the water cycle, which can be, like an extract from an informative report. Another could be about a pirate sailing in the water. Another could be about swimming lessons, and so on. So you can sort of see there's an overarching theme that's shared, which is obviously water. Uh, do answer the questions sequentially and skip the questions you are unsure of. So if questions are left blank, quickly scan the text again to mentally summarize the text with those keywords, then answer the remaining unanswered questions. So if you still cannot answer it, provide an estimate and flag the function there to come back to. So I usually aim for 30 seconds to scan each extract and maximum 30 seconds per question. Personally, for me, I do prefer actually to start the exam, so the whole selective test reading exam. Personally, I prefer to start with this section because for me personally, I tend to save up some more time by answering more questions first at the start. For me, it can give you a small confidence boost and lower your stress in a way in the middle of the exam timed conditions because you've done more questions in comparison to the time. But again, I think it's best to keep testing which exam section you'd prefer to start on your own, as everyone has their own preferences and strengths, which should be used in the exam. Awesome. Well, that wraps up the reading and writing section for this selected test masterclass. Again, I want to emphasize the importance of English, both reading and writing, which now accounts for half of your child's selective test results. I do believe that purposeful guidance and direct feedback on individual student skills, I think that's essential to acing both of these topics. Just one sort of final personal note. So for all the students that are listening here today, I do want you all to think and reflect. It's sort of one quote that I came across by Thomas Fuller that really resonated with me. All things are difficult before they are easy. So hard work, perseverance, and grit will always go a long way. So if you ever are feeling that mental barrier approaching, your studies, it all does sort of stack up and you know make it up in the end. But yeah, thank you very much. I hope it's been quite valuable, and I will now pass it on to Rachel from Precision Mathematics Academy, who will dive into mathematical reasoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, for your insightful presentation. So as mentioned earlier, I will now focus on the exam strategies and foundational techniques to excel in the mathematical reasoning section of the selective test. So the mathematical reasoning exam is weighted at 25% in line with the other sections, and the exam consists 35 questions and will run for 40 minutes, which gives you approximately about 1 minute and 8.5 seconds for each question. This time schedule is highly important as all questions are equally weighted. If you find yourself stuck, mark the question, skip it, and return to it later. Remember, while some questions may seem more challenging, they are not worth more marks than the easier ones. So before getting into the exam strategies, I will be uncovering the foundations of what needs to be understood to even start beginning to study for the mathematical reasoning content. So in 2021, a transition from mathematics to mathematical reasoning was marked, which is a significant shift towards emphasizing logical reasoning and problem-solving skills over rote learning skills. And NESA introduces mathematical reasoning to not only test students to be true mathematicians, but to restrict students from rote drill in arithmetic questions. So this shift ultimately means that students must develop critical thinking skills, which is the ability to analyze, evaluate, and solve problems using logic, which goes beyond performing basic calculations. So, rote learning focuses on memorizing information through repetition without fully understanding the underlying concepts. So, for example, memorizing the surface area formula without knowing what it measures or how it applies. While it can help with quick recall, it falls short when facing unfamiliar problems. So, true mastery comes from understanding not just how, but why concepts work. By grasping the meaning behind formulas, you can confidently apply your knowledge to complex situations. I've witnessed this misconception firsthand where many parents and students believe rote memorization is the key to exam success, which in fact is really not. So, thus to summarize, for the selective mathematical reasoning test, students are assessed on their ability to unravel unfamiliar problems, identify patterns and relationships, draw logical conclusions, and clearly articulate their thinking. And this is the basis of what all mathematics questions lie upon in the mathematical reasoning exam. So I would now like to introduce the foundations of mathematical reasoning, which the NSW curriculum defines this as the ability to work mathematically. So, mastering mathematical reasoning begins with a solid understanding of its foundational framework, which supports logical and analytic thinking. So, success in selective mathematics hinges on mastering working mathematically skills. However, many students underperform because they fail to know of these skills and how to apply them effectively. Students must be able to flexibly apply all topics within the working mathematically outcomes, which are communicating, which is the ability to clearly express mathematical ideas and solutions using appropriate language and symbols, problem solving, which is the ability to apply effective strategies, ideas, and solutions. Apply effective strategies to solve a variety of mathematical problems. Reasoning, which is to justify answers with logical arguments and identify patterns or connections. And the last outcome, which is understanding and fluency, which is to demonstrate a solid grasp of concepts and apply procedures accurately and efficiently. So what parents can do to support their child is by encouraging them to clearly communicate and reason through their solutions. And what I recommend students to do is to be purposeful and attentive, ensuring that they fully understand the concept and can confidently demonstrate fluency in applying their skills to solve problems. So essentially, you can use these outcomes for every question as a checklist to test yourself on whether or not you truly understand how you completed the question, as this will ensure you are efficiently spending your study time. If you cannot check off all 4 outcomes, this may indicate that you haven't fully grasped the material. So on this slide, I have provided the definitions of the working mathematically outcomes, which I highly recommend both parents and students take the time to review and fully understand these definitions after the seminar concludes. So applying these outcomes is key to cultivating a mathematical mindset, equipping students with the habits and skills. So I would just like to share a quote by Cocoa et al. 2010. They state that through this framework, students see the beauty of mathematics as they reason, tackle problems, and reflect on their thinking, developing mathematical habits of mind. And these habits are fundamental in preparing for selective school exams, but it also extends beyond that. So an important point that I would like to make is that whether or not your child gains entry into a selective school, the preparation process builds critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and evidence-based decision-making, which are all key foundations for success in high school mathematics. So Now I would like to explore the three categories mathematical reasoning questions are divided into, and as they each target a specific aspect of problem solving. So the first category I will explore is called the procedure design and problem solving. This type of question makes up the bulk of the paper, and students are given either a verbal or visual stimuli with information, and using their skills in reasoning and understanding of mathematical concepts and operations, they will need to create a procedure or method to find a solution to the question. This method may not yield immediate results as there are numerous strategies to master, but consistent practice and experience will lead to improvement over time. So this is an example of what a procedure design and problem-solving question looks like in the exam. It asks students to carefully interpret the relationship between days and use logical reasoning to calculate Monday's ticket sales. So a key aspect of solving this particular question is applying the working backwards strategy, which is a powerful problem-solving method that requires starting with the known total and retracing the steps to find the unknown. The second type of question in the exam is called the interpreting and analyzing data type questions. So what this covers is it covers various types of data, which includes graphs, diagrams, and tables. And students are expected to identify patterns, trends, and relationships within data sets. So using this information, they must make logical comparisons and draw informed conclusions. And so essentially, it's about uncovering the story behind the numbers and presenting insights clearly and accurately. So as parents, you can support your children by encouraging them to engage with real-world data, such as analyzing weather reports, interpreting charts in news articles, or even comparing statistics in sports. These small activities can help build their confidence and familiarity with working with data. So for example, in this type of question, students need to understand how to read a line graph with multiple variables. They must correctly interpret the x-axis and y-axis, and the ability to identify that there are three unique graphs on the same Cartesian plane. So another technique to use when interpreting and analyzing data questions is pattern recognition. So pattern recognition challenges students to make sense of visual data, the graph, and recognize similarities and differences, such as the intersecting points of the oxygen and helium as seen in the question. Understand how the relative portions of gases can change with altitude, and also identifying where lines cross, which indicates equal fractions of different gases. Another technique is to use critical thinking elements. This essentially covers to verify if statements are universally true or only true at specific points, and the answer choices requiring them to consider combinations of correct statements. And the last exam technique is statement analysis skills, which students must be able to establish and identify unknowns, so what the X or Y and Z represent. And I would just like to clarify that all the points I am saying are directly in relation to the question on the left, as you can see, but on the slides, it has a more general tip bank that students can follow. So the last type of question is called the filtering and prioritizing relevant information category. So this essentially covers filtering questions which you must read and interpret visual or verbal stimuli, and you must identify the relevant information to solve the problem. These questions often involve number operations, graphs, and tables, where not all information is necessary. So students must apply their mathematical knowledge to determine what is relevant. So if we have a look at this example question, this question requires students to interpret a detailed timetable and select only the relevant information for solving the problem. Not all times provided in the timetable are needed, so students must filter out irrelevant bus schedules and focus solely on the second departure from Newtown and the corresponding return from Oddville. So some exam techniques and strategies for these type of questions that I'd like to cover first is to be able to identify relevant information. So this is to find and focus on the specific bus time related to Sonmi's journey. The second point is to ignore irrelevant data. This is to dismiss the times of other bus services that are not part of her trip. The third point is to apply mathematical knowledge, which is to use subtraction to calculate total time while ensuring accuracy in handling time data. And the last technique is to understand and present the story. So to analyze how Sunmi is away and clearly articulate the result, showcasing logical reasoning based on the timetable. So this concludes the section on preparing for mathematical reasoning for the selective test. Should you have any further questions regarding study methods or mathematics, please feel free to contact me, and I will now pass it on to Alvin, who will be covering the thinking skills component of this seminar.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for your deep insight into how to excel in mathematical reasoning. So, my name is Alvin, and I'll be going through thinking skills, the theory, techniques, and strategies that you will need to know or you'll need to learn in order to ace the 2025 selective test. So starting off, what is thinking skills? Thinking skills is the completely new area of the selective test, which replaced the old general ability. Now, it's a 40-minute, 40-question test, but don't let that fool you, because even most students would say you would spend a minute per question. But in thinking skills, questions are designed with a range of difficulties. So some questions are designed to take only 30 seconds to do, while others are designed to take a minute and a half or even more. So the government has defined thinking skills as really a test that just examines two abilities in students. Number one, can you think critically? And number two, can you problem solve? What do those two mean? To think critically means to be able to actually think more deeply and be able to make your own judgment about what you read and what you're being told. So what that means is they want to figure out which students are the ones where if you give them an argument or reasoning, they can actually think to themselves, that's a good argument, or actually the argument doesn't make sense, or that reasoning isn't really based on proper logic. They want to separate those students that are stronger from maybe weaker students who might read arguments and reasoning and think to themselves, I don't really know. I guess this is fact. I guess this is the truth. Problem solving is what happens when they give you information and they give you all the tools you need, but they don't tell you how to use them. And they want to figure out which are the stronger students which know how to put the pieces together in order to solve the problem versus which are maybe the weaker students who don't really know how the pieces fit together, who might need to have all the steps laid out for them in order for them to figure anything out. So the government doesn't really break down thinking skills very well, so we at Cortex Academy have broken it down into 4 separate areas: critical reasoning, logical reasoning, abstract reasoning, and numerical reasoning. Each area of thinking skills requires a different set of skills, and you practice and train for them in a different way. Right? Critical reasoning would require more reading comprehension. Logical reasoning is much more logic-based. Abstract reasoning is much more visual-based, and numerical reasoning is much more mathematics-based. My advice is there is no area that is particularly easy or hard. There's only areas that you are stronger at and that you are weaker at. So my advice is you want to figure out how strong are you in each section, in each area, and which ones do you need to focus more on? So starting in order, critical reasoning is the area of thinking skills which revolves around arguments and reasoning, and it makes up the largest area of thinking skills, making up around 16 out of 40 questions each year. So that's quite a lot. There are 4 question types that show up every single year, and there are only these 4 from the past papers from what we've seen. There's the strengthening argument and weakening argument questions, in which you're given an argument and you're asked which one of these statements, if true, most strengthens, or would go on to most if added, would most weaken the argument. For these types of questions, which is probably one of the most famous, and I'm sure you all have seen before, the advice to solving these questions is that too many students focus on the options, when instead your time and energy should actually be more on the arguments themselves. If you want to get better at these questions, you actually want to practice and improve your ability to identify and pinpoint what exactly is the core message in this argument. Right? The clearer an idea you have of what the author's trying to tell the audience, the easier it'll be for you to find the option. So if I were to put a time split on it, I would say probably spend, if you're doing a minute, 40 seconds should be actually spent on the argument and only 20 seconds going through the options, which is actually, I'd say, the opposite of what a lot of students do, where a lot of students actually end up tossing and turning and spending too much time, choosing between A or B, when instead, if they just spend a bit more time trying to understand what the argument's saying, it actually makes it a lot clearer as to what would strengthen or weaken the argument, right? Because if you have a very fuzzy idea of what the argument's about, then you only have a very fuzzy idea of what would make the argument better or worse. The third question type, which is whose reasoning is correct. Again, a very famous and popular question type. You're given a box of information in it, and you have 2 speakers which each make a statement based off the information in the box, and you're asked whose statement here is logically correct. If you want to practice and improve in this question type, you need to be comfortable and confident at breaking down and understanding the logic of individual statements. So what does that mean? For example, to become a successful architect, you need to be creative and also have excellent attention to detail. What does that logically mean? Or does that mean if you see a successful architect, you know they have those 2 skills? Or is it you see someone with those 2 skills and you can say confidently that's going to be a successful architect, right? Because those 2 things are very different. Once you're confident with breaking down and understanding the logic of statements, the next step, which is quite advanced, is you want to learn logic theory. So logic theory is exactly as it sounds, right? It's the theory of what makes a statement logically valid and what would make a statement logically invalid. All right, so I don't have the time to go through logic theory here. That topic requires at least 2 lessons in order for students to really grasp. The fourth question type is mistaken reasoning, which are given information in a box, and then you have 1 speaker that makes a statement that is purposefully incorrect, and you're asked which option there explains why they're incorrect. This question type is, compared to the others, I'd say a bit more straightforward. If you want to prepare for this question type, all you have to do is learn what are the common types of assumptions and fallacies out there. Because if you've looked through the past papers before, you actually notice that the selective test likes to recycle and reuse a lot of the same assumptions and a lot of the same fallacies. Right? Every single year, you'll see some of the same ones used again and again. So if you simply get familiar with what are those types of assumptions and fallacies, then you should be very well off when it comes to the test. Now, logical reasoning. This is the next area of thinking skills, which makes up 12 out of 40 of the questions each year, more or less. Logical reasoning is the area of thinking skills which involves logic-based word problems. And they come in a very wide variety of question types, with some types that repeat each year. For example, every year, there's at least 1 question where you have to arrange people in a line or arrange them around a circle or around a table. Now, overall, logical reasoning is quite diverse, but they follow this general structure. How logical reasoning works is they will give you a story and they'll tell you everything you need to know to understand the full picture. What's the challenge? The challenge here is they'll give you the story, but they'll give you the information in fragments. And they'll give you the information in a very chaotic and a muddled up order. And the challenge here is you have to figure out how do the pieces of the story, how do the fragments fit together in order to create the full picture. So for example, an arrangement question, you're given a story, right? There's 5 children doing a test with 5 difficult questions. And instead of telling you how fast or slow each student was, instead of telling you how many questions each student got right or wrong, they give it to you in fragments, right? This person's faster than that. This person got less questions wrong than that person, right? You have to figure out yourself, how do the pieces fit together? The analogy that I like to use for my students is logical reasoning is a lot like solving a jigsaw puzzle, right? Where you open up the box and you're given all you need to get the full picture, but it's all over the place. So how do you solve it? Well, use this 3-step strategy. Number 1, identify what is the objective of this question, right? At the end of the day, what are you aiming for and what will the full picture look like? Number 2, once you have that down, formulate your game plan. Right? What technique do I want to use here? What diagram do I want to use here? So for an arrangement question, you want to approach this by drawing 2 diagrams, right? One for speed and one for accuracy, and you want to use the information to fill in that diagram. Now for a truth and lie question, where now you're a detective trying to investigate suspects in a crime, you approach it with a different game plan where I would probably use guess and check, letting one of the men tell the truth and letting the other 2 men lie, and seeing through guess and check who there is actually guilty and who there's innocent. Once you have your game plan, number 3 is apply your information. This means using all the pieces of the story, figure out how do the pieces fit together and in what order do they fit together. Right? Whenever you're doing a logical reasoning question, use these 3 steps. Or when you're reviewing your questions, use these 3 steps. What's the objective? What technique or game plan should I use? And how do I piece this information together? The third area of thinking skills is abstract reasoning, which is the area of thinking skills which involves pictures and pattern questions. And there are 4 types of questions they can throw at you. They can give you a different perspective question, where you're given an object from one point of view, and you're asked what it looks like from another point of view. You can be asked a mental manipulation question, in which you're given an object and you're asked to perform some sort of action to it. Or you could be asked abstract problems question, where this is a picture problem which involves a logic-based question. So in that case, you have to use the logical reasoning strategy of identify the objective, formulate your game plan, and apply the information. Or you could be given a pattern question, in which you have to identify how did these shapes, or how did this become that? And my strategy there is, if you're trying to identify a pattern, start with the bigger picture, right? What's what's going on? And then zoom in and focus on the individual elements, right? How exactly does a triangle move? How exactly does a semicircle move? Now, my general advice is, if you want to get better at this area of thinking skills, engage in activities that simply require visualization. So that could be doing more questions that involve pictures and patterns, or it could be doing any sort of activities that require visualization in general. So this could be like playing chess, where you have to imagine the pieces moving around, or maybe solving a Rubik's Cube, or sort of even sports, or any sort of, I guess, puzzle-like game that requires vivid imagination. In my opinion, I would say that abstract reasoning should be your lowest priority, just because it makes up a very disproportionately small percentage of thinking skills. Now, the last area is numerical reasoning, which is the area of thinking skills which involves maths. Now, how is this different to mathematical reasoning? Well, there is quite a bit of overlap, but I'd say the difference is this. Mathematical reasoning are more or less math questions, while numerical reasoning are logic-based questions that just happen to have mathematical concepts in them. So it's sort of like logical reasoning. There is a very wide variety of questions they can throw at you, but there are some types that are repeating. For example, graphs and table questions, there is at least a few every single year. So you need to be familiar with your graphs and tables. And the advice in general for numerical reasoning questions is you don't get better at this area by just simply doing more math, right? Knowing your times tables, knowing your formulas isn't going to help you in this area. How do you get better at these questions? You actually want to have a strong foundational understanding of mathematical concepts. That means understand the proper theory of math rather than just memorizing formulas and rote learning. So instead of just doing 1,000 graph questions, what is the purpose of each type of graph, right? What is a pie graph and how is it different to a line graph conceptually? Right, so in this question here, you're given a pie graph, but unlike a normal math question, the pie graph doesn't have any numbers on them. So how do you solve this question? Well, it really comes down to, do you conceptually understand how to read a pie chart and what is a pie chart for? So that wraps up thinking skills. And I'd say thinking skills is an area where you have, in order for you to improve in it, you have to think about your thinking. Meaning you have to actively reflect and review on your thinking process, which is a very difficult process, I guess, process. But it's something that we take a lot of confidence in helping students do. So here at Cortex Academy, our team of talented tutors, which is me, Domya, and Sanjay, we aim to empower students with the proper skills required to ace thinking skills. And our aim is we want to create free thinkers in a fun environment. Okay, thank you guys. So the selective test preparation summarized. So the selective test, again, is made of 4 areas, 4 sections: the reading test, mathematical reasoning, thinking skills, and the writing tests. And the 4 sections of the selective test are now all equally weighted, 25% each. How do you maximize your score? If you want to maximize your chances of getting to your dream selected school, number one, the first thing you want to do is you really want to familiarize yourself with the new digital testing platform. So on the New South Wales government website, you can click and actually try the sample test on the new testing platform. And I recommend every single parent and student be familiar with how every single button works, of how the platform feels, and how the questions look. Because the one advantage you want to have over any other student is you want to know what you're coming into on the day of the test. The second advice is understand the design of each subject, right? The selective test, which is written by Cambridge University, by professors in Cambridge University, they more or less follow a template. Now, we don't know what the template looks like in the selective test, but if you can look through the past papers and try to understand how this test is structured and how it is designed, that will give you a significant footing and advantage over the other students. Number 3, don't just rote learn and memorize questions. Actually focus on skills and technique. Right, so that means when you're doing questions, rather than memorizing how I did this question, try to take more focus and energy on remembering what process did I use to solve this question. Right, what working out did I use? What skills and techniques and strategies did I use, and how can I improve on them? Number 4, if you want to actually maximize your selective score, you want to be well-rounded. That means it's a lot better to be moderately good at 2 subjects than it is to be really good at one and to be very weak at another. That means you want to be strategic with how you use your time. If you're already very, very strong and good at one section, let's say you're really good at reading, perhaps it's time to put a bit more focus and energy onto another area that you're a bit weaker at. Because the amount of time and energy it requires for you to go from top 2% to top 1% is probably the same amount of time and energy it would have taken for you to get from top 50 to maybe top 30%. Right, so you want to actually be very well-rounded across the board rather than being very good at one and being very weak at another. And finally, and this goes for any section, you need to actively reflect and review on your own progress. right? Don't just do questions and just say, okay, it's done and over with. Every time you do a question, you need to go through and think to yourself, okay, if I got it right, could I have done it in a better way? And if I got it wrong, why did I get it wrong? And how can I get it right the next time? All right, but that there wraps up the webinar. Thank you guys for sticking through it. And now I'll open up the floor for Q&A. So please submit your questions on the Q&A section, and we will each take our turns in answering your questions.
If you just on a side note, if you have written a question already in the past, you might have seen there's some written answer responses there as well. If you can access that on the Q&A panel, if you jump to the answered subheading, so that there'll be some written responses there as well.
All right, so will this video be available in 2026? So you're talking about this webinar masterclass video. So this is recorded and this will be sent and uploaded on our Facebook groups. Nelson will be sent to the parents here.
Yeah, it'll all be accessed on our Facebook groups. And yeah, we'll sort of take it from there.
Yeah. All right, great. What about finding the main conclusion of the text? Does that count as critical reasoning? Yes. So Momokin, I mean, this might apply to reading and thinking skills, but finding the main conclusion of the text is a part of critical reasoning. Now, is it a question type that shows up in the selective test? No, right? There won't be questions in the selective test that will ask you to find the conclusion, but you need to have the skill of being able to find the conclusion. What are the 4 parts in TS reasoning? So the 4 parts were critical reasoning, logical reasoning, abstract reasoning, and numerical reasoning. So if you go back through it here. So those are the 4 areas, and that's how many questions will show up in each area. All right. How would you start the test? Like doing the first 10 questions, then doing the last 5, doing the middle ones? I've never really heard of that strategy before. How would I approach thinking skills? My approach is I would do an order of 1 to 40, because where are the easy questions? Where are the hard questions? We don't know, right? I know in some tutoring centers, they like to put the hard ones at the beginning or at the end. But on the day of the selective test, there is no template like that. So I would say do the questions in order of 1 to 40. But if you see a question that seems very, very large, and it's a question that maybe you're weaker at, or it seems very difficult, please do feel free to guess that question, skip it, and come back to it later, because that might be a question that is designed to take 2 minutes to do, and you really don't want to have that question eat up your time. All right. So I'll just answer the thinking skills questions for you. And how many questions each? So I've shown that in the previous slide. Will there always be that structure in TS? So from the past papers, from the sample paper from the 2021, 2022, 2023, and the 2024, I don't believe has come out yet, but I have to check that. Across all the papers, the structure has more or less followed that type. There's around 16 critical reasoning questions, there's around 4 abstract reasoning, around 12 logical reasoning, and around 8 numerical reasoning. Now, sometimes it increases 1 or decreases by 1, but more or less, it does actually follow that overall template. All right. And I think that's all the thinking skills questions. So the next ones there, I think, are writing. So I'll pass this off to Nelson. Oh, so Nelson, you're muted right now, by the way.
Thanks, Alvin. My fault.
No worries.
Great question, Shital. What are common writing topics in the selective test? It is an open response. How I like to frame this for, how we like to aim it, to frame it for NL Academy students is, generally speaking, the vast range of writing styles fall under sort of four categories. The first one being creative/narrative, the second one persuasive, then discussion writing, then informative writing. And informative writing, in a way, branches off into a few sort of more niche writing styles. But those are all, if we sort of break it down to first principles, they are all actually informative in their macrostructure and microstructure. But the tone and stylistic techniques that you use for different ones can slightly change, but the overall macrostructure remains quite consistent. So, for example, a letter versus a pure report or newspaper report. Obviously, there's a slight change in structure, but your overall tone should be in a way quite consistent. But maybe in a letter you draw from some more so creative narrative elements and combine that with informative elements as well. But if you think about four sort of pillars: creative, persuasive, discussion, and informative. If you have all these four sort of set in stone, and you understand the macrostructure, microstructure, and all the ins and outs for these sort of four, then for different types of writing tasks that you're prompted with, you can draw from elements from these four. So say an advice sheet, it is mostly informative because you're providing advice, but at the same time you can draw personal anecdotes that do come from, say, our creative and persuasive modules as well. So you can sort of combine them a few, but if they do go down quite a sort of generic route by persuasive or a narrative creative or a pure report, obviously it sort of aligns. But knowing these four, again, I want to reiterate that it does provide you the skills to tackle the open response, so a wide range of open types of questions. So that's in a way that's why our courses are split like that. So each term is focused on one separate core module writing style. That's the purpose of it, is because we are preparing for an open response question in the selective. So hopefully that answers your question, Chital. Do we have our own device? Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, at the testing center, they will be providing you a device to test. You won't be bringing your own device. So everything will be provided at a testing center. I believe there are a few more. Thinking skills questions.
Yeah. All right, thanks. So for thinking skills, how long should we spend on average on strengthening, weakening questions and finding mistake questions? Look, thinking skills questions can really range in difficulty and in how large the question is. I would say that strengthening, weakening argument questions typically do spend around a minute on them. And it really depends on a few things: the complexity of the argument and also how long the argument is. I've seen arguments that are literally 2 sentences long, and I've seen arguments that are like, a whole really fat, chunky paragraph. So it depends on, I guess, the size of the argument and the complexity. Finding mistake questions, I would say finding mistake questions typically, they don't really take more than a minute to do. I would say a minute or less should be what you'd be aiming for, just because I haven't really seen any that are quite bulky, and I haven't really seen any that really stump you. How much time should you spend on each of the four areas? It really comes down to, look, there isn't a, I guess, strict answer to how much time you spend on each area for thinking skills. I'd say on overall, you want to spend around a minute per average for each area. But I would say that abstract reasoning, some of those questions typically you can spend less time on. And logical reasoning, I'd say that area is the one that's a bit more diverse. And numerical reasoning, where in logical reasoning and numerical reasoning, that's where you really see questions which can be quite easy or very, very hard. And critical reasoning, I'd say, is a bit more consistent, where the questions are around a minute. But across all areas, there are hard questions that take almost 2 minutes to do, and there will be easy questions that might take even less than 30 seconds to do. All right, so Saru says thanks. Thank you to you. And then how do you interpret poems? Well, this one's back to Nelson.
Yeah, for poems, they're notoriously tricky because the purpose is to have students focus on trying to textually analyze or interpret them with quite a lot of depth. I think the first thing to think about, and obviously, as I spoke in earlier in the masterclass, which we will send the screen recording for, it's quite important to approach it in the way where you're trying to keep unraveling, sort of like imagining you're unraveling layers. So everything or most things in a poem are never actually quite literal. It's quite rare for a poem to say be talking about a tree. I'll give you, an example. Maybe I don't remember which poem, but I've read a lot of poems. But say there was a poem about a tree. So this poem is just talking about the tree and the seasons that are affecting the tree. The poem in itself isn't actually about just the tree and the seasons. But if we can understand that poems will always try to draw into ideas that surround both society, one, and two, the human experience, then we can sort of try to link that to ourselves and the people around us. So what does it sort of symbolize if a tree is being affected by the seasons? What does, seasonal changes represent? First thing that will come up in my mind, a tree represents growth. Seasonal changes represents the passing of time. Maybe, the insight of a poem that has both seasons and tree as a metaphor or symbolism in there. My sort of, inferring that straight away, I think because a tree can represent growth and maybe seasons can represent the passing of time, maybe it's about, the idea of how humans sort of endure change as we sort of progress and grow up and, as we sort of go along with our lives. We approach change and we grow. We grow as people. We grow as, a whole community. That's an idea that links to society and the human experience, and it's sort of symbolized by, say, that tree example or by the seasonal change example. So to interpret, just sort of coming back to your question, to interpret poems faster isn't actually about reading it fast. It's about taking the time to deeply understand and unravel the layers, because ultimately that will actually make it faster. Because then, in a way, if you've skimmed over a poem, which some students do, then you lose a lot of time going back and forth between the questions. So say you look at a question and have no idea what's going on, and then you'd have to reread the poem again, and you'd reread it with a similar level of depth, and you're sort of skimming it through. And in a way, you're by skimming over a poem, you can think about you've covered the first maybe few layers up here, but the actual reasoning underneath it is here. So take the time to sort of dig it through. Before you go on, you can think of it. I'll give you guys an analogy. So let's say we're trying to dig a hole. We're trying to dig a hole for a well. So we want to build a well in our local community, and we, obviously, the bigger the well, the more water we get, right? If you're only digging the well a meter deep, how much water can you get? But if it's, say, a couple meters deep and you're trying to really get to the core of it to get, as much as you can, then that's obviously where the value is, right? So that's my personal recommendation for interpreting poems faster, which is not actually by reading them and skimming them over fast. It's by actually understanding them in the first place. So hopefully that answers your question. Is maximizing your vocab strength, does maximizing your vocab strength help in understanding the question in any of the subjects? I can't say for, maths and thinking skills, but I can say for reading, it wouldn't hurt to develop vocabulary. So obviously in NL Academy lessons, when we, at the end of our lessons every week, we have our words of the week, 5 advanced vocab words. And for those, in my opinion, I think it's important to have those there and to consistently revise and learn new types of words and how they can be used in various contexts, because it's not only about helping understanding questions. Whilst you could have a question that can have, maybe a hard word in it, I think the most important value for that is in your writing. So obviously, you can think of it like a Swiss Army knife. Like, I like to speak in analogies. So let's say, think of a Swiss Army knife that only has a hammer. It's not a Swiss Army knife, it's a hammer, right? But if you have a Swiss Army knife with maybe 100 tools, then all those tools, you can think of that like your vocab words. Whenever you need to sort of explain something or portray or reveal a certain idea, you already have a suite of tools that you can use. Maybe given that same analogy, say if you're in the bush, you're bushwalking, and you need to um, cut some fruit up. You can't cut a fruit with a hammer, only with like a small blade. And in that way, it's like, say, in persuasive writing, obviously, as you're not using a vast range of vivid imagery as you would in creatives in your persuasives, it still does mean that if you are approached with a creative or narrative question, you have the adequate skills, vocabulary, and understanding vocabulary in context to approach that style of writing. And the vice versa applies for persuasive discussion and informative as well. So that's my sort of take, Preeti, and yeah, I hope that makes sense. When doing the writing piece, if I can't come up with an idea to make a plan in 3 minutes, how to improve? Yeah, great question. A great tip, which I'm not sure if you might have heard this tip before. It's great to start with the complication. So when you plan, think about what goes wrong first. Just, whatever the prompt is, just think about what goes wrong. Because your whole story will always be centered around what goes wrong. And this, you can think of my hand here is what goes wrong. After that's the resolution. Before that is the opening and your rising tension. This is what holds your piece together. That's what the strongest part is going to be. Your actual opening hook at the start of your writing piece will actually, in a way, you could foreshadow your complication, or you could, it'll always have to start from somewhere else to lead up to your complication in the first place. So if you're stuck on planning, many students approach planning, say, with the very generic structure. And I know many other, places do sort of teach planning like this, but I'd say the best way is to don't start with just characterization, setting, and just, where should I set the scene? Start with what goes wrong, work backwards, and then work forwards from there. So that's my tip. I hope that helps. Let's see. I'll answer this one as well. What are common writing styles in writing tests? So again, it's open. I think it's open. I think I already answered this question. How much time should we spend in each area for reading? So that varies depending on the question style. So I covered that in detail earlier in the masterclass. I think maybe we'll send the recording over. There are a lot of moving parts for that, so I won't have enough time to break it all down. Should we use template to prepare for the writing? You should always plan your structure. You should have, optimally, students should already have the structure. So 3 things: macro structure, microstructure, and the relevant stylistic features that they want to use to apply to their writing. That should be a habit already built into students months beforehand, leading up to the test, so that in the test it becomes second nature. Because if you aren't actually quite familiar with the structure of how to write, say, an informative or a discussion piece, or that, then in the exam, since you're under time conditions, it's quite likely that there won't be a structure when you approach it. So that all comes from the preparation, the months, or even the 1 year plus leading up to the exam. In English question 15, 16, if you get one wrong, do you get the whole thing wrong? No. It's the same as say last year's paper. It's the exact same structure, but they call it question 15 because it's on one page, right? You have the whole question 15 closed passage section is on one page, but it's worth 6 marks. So, you can think of it like question 15 has 6 marks allocated to it. So you can get like 5 out of 6, 4 out of 6, and so on. So, no, you don't get the whole thing wrong. Awesome. Thank you, Shital. No worries. You can't bring highlighters at all, and you won't be able to highlight on the thing either. It's completely digital. And although you can request for paper and bring 2B pencils, eraser, and a sharpener. Should touch typing be practiced on laptop, iPad, computer, or laptop? Anything with a keyboard. I don't recommend an iPad because an iPad is a little bit different. Touch typing on either a laptop or computer would be the best, in my opinion. The 3-day test, the test isn't actually 3 days. It's on one day, but you can choose one day out of the 3. So it's the purpose of that. So Prima, what day is better to choose, Friday or weekend? It doesn't matter. It will be sort of based on what works best for you. So just obviously depending on your own personal preferences. What should I do to improve my typing now that it is computer-based? Something I recommend is there are a lot of free courses on YouTube, but something I oftentimes do is for every writing task that you do from now onwards, you can just, go to a Google Doc or Notes and type it out there. On your Google Doc, there's a way to turn off your autocorrect, and just practice typing and writing it out under timed conditions. In a way, it's muscle memory and habit. For me, I can touch type, but it's because I've done it for so long. It's just come naturally by habit. So that's sort of a numbers game and a repetitive sort of game for that. Where can we get feedback for writing? So, I mean, feedback for writing. I would say NLH Academy, but in general, I do think that if you are in contact with anyone that has passed the selective test before and is quite proficient and is able to, or is obviously, accustomed to the selective test syllabus, then you should, even it could be a friend or family friend, then I do suggest just even approaching them if you don't opt for, obviously, a specialist tutoring center or anything like that. That would be the second best option, I think. But make sure it's very important, in my opinion, to make sure that you do know whether or not the person you're receiving feedback from is someone that is good at providing that feedback, or should be someone to be providing effective feedback, because you essentially will adopt the person who's giving feedback to you. You will essentially adopt their writing style because it's based on their own feedback, which has worked for them. So my frame of mind is the person I'm receiving feedback for, have they surpassed the goal that I'm trying to achieve? If yes, then I sort of go by their feedback. If no, then it might be an opportunity to reconsider. In writing, can you write a poem? We haven't really seen a poem before, but potentially it's open. They could ask anything. Are the number of questions in reading test 16 or 40? It's 30. So 30 marks total, but they say you have 15 questions, but 15 and 16 are multiple parts. So it's the same as all previous years. So 15 would be a closed passage, which is worth 6 marks. And question 16 will be choose the extract, which is actually worth 10 marks. So these two questions by themselves are worth 16 marks total. If you don't use figurative language, will you lose marks? There's no exact sort of framework for will I lose marks for this? Will I gain marks for doing this? It's about how a piece comes towards or together as a whole. What we like to call it is it's called organic unity. So what that is there are all parts of a text, including your structure, style, figurative language, as you mentioned, vivid imagery. Say if we're talking about narrative, our use of symbolism, all of these things should come together, and the overall effort of all these things will produce your mark. Because a piece that's quite strong figuratively or with their stylistic techniques, but is not structured, can won't be as strong. But in a way, if there's a piece that's structured quite well but lacks the figurative language, that also sort of makes that imbalance as well. Is there some things which you must not do or ruin your writing? There's no specific rule for that because it does depend on the different type of writing style. Some pieces, it depends on, obviously the theory for each writing type, because some writing styles you should have more of an informative tone, voice. The structure is more structured. Some writing pieces are a little bit more fragmented, and it's a little bit more cohesive or conversational, and the tone is less formal. So your writing style must change depending on the writing type that's being asked. So again, it's why in the English Academy each term is separate by the writing type. The purpose of that is to ensure that there's different skills, tones, use of language and structure that are learnt that can be applied to different writing styles. You can plan, you'll be provided with some papers. You bring 2B pencils so you can plan. Do students need to plan on paper or online for writing exam? I do see you can even plan in that text box if you wanted to, but you can remember to just cut it away, cut it off before you obviously submit. But again, you will be provided some paper, so you can use a 2B pencil to draft some notes there. I believe there are a few. Are there a few thinking skills questions, or are there a few mathematics questions?
Yes, I'll just answer one. I think that was a bit before, but is thinking skills pretty much an overlap of reading and mathematical reasoning? I wouldn't say it's an overlap. I would say thinking skills, as the name suggests, really just examines your ability to think, right? So yes, that will have reading, that will have math, as it will have non-verbal questions like pictures and patterns, and it will have word problem questions. So I would think of thinking skills isn't tied down to any particular subject. It's not tied down to any particular topic, right? If a question can test your ability to think critically, if a question requires you to problem solve, then it can appear in thinking skills. So it has an overlap of all different types of subjects. But I think there was a math question from Francis Yoon in preparation for math selective exam. So Rachel, I'll give that one to you.
Yeah, so she said in the preparation for math selective exam, which workbook should we buy extra and work to practice at home? I recommend just any textbook that covers problem solving. Definitely not textbooks that are just that regurgitate the same skill over and over again, because as we stated, majority of the entire test is based upon problem solving. So maybe resources like New Century Maths or even Excel Advanced Mathematics that you can just buy simply from the news agency. I would recommend purchasing that if you would want extra practice. But before that, making sure that you have done all the practice that is available for all the past papers that have been released on the a government site. I think that is pasted on one of the comments. I think I answered all the math questions through the comments as well. Are there any last questions you guys want to answer?
I think what we'll do when we do release our screen recordings, obviously in the Facebook groups, when we do release those recordings, just under the comments section. So if any questions that are left unanswered, or if there are any additional questions that you sort of come up with after obviously this masterclass, then you can leave a comment under that post, and then we'll get back to you by replying under the post. But otherwise, overall, thank you so much for joining us today in the masterclass. Again, from all three of us, we hope it's been quite valuable. So a bit of insight into both the selective test updates, reading, maths, and thinking skills, and obviously writing. And yeah, again, if you do have any further questions, we will post a screen recording, and please do leave a comment underneath. So again, as a final lasting note, obviously with term one coming around the corner, we've left our contacts just on the screen there, and you can take a look on our websites if you're interested in learning more about the courses that we do offer in preparation for the selective tests. But thank you so much for all of your time, and again, we hope you guys are all having a lovely start to the new year, and we hope again you have a lovely restful break, and take care. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you, Maury. All right, so stop sharing, and we're end of the seminar. We're end of the webinar here.
Yep.
Yep. All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
See
See
you
you
all
guys.
later.